Good morning, women of Illinois and Wisconsin region. Joanne and Beth asked that I give you a brief update on Disciples Women's Ministries, especially a couple of areas we talked about in January at our Leadership Council gathering. As I hope you know, nearly 8 years ago, Disciples Women became a self-sustaining ministry. The short version of that is that we operate as a general ministry, but no change has been made to our general church documents. We operate under the principles of mutuality, which is a covenant between Disciples Women and Disciples Home Missions. Because of some very difficult times in the past, Disciples Women wanted their own leadership, making their own decisions about their ministry and their own decisions on how their money is spent. The principles of mutuality established Disciples Women as a self-determining ministry. The agreement was for 5 years, and we renewed it for another 5. We have a couple years before we have the conversation with DHM about extending it. Under the covenant with DHM, we receive a portion of DHM's Disciples Mission Fund. We do not receive directly from DMF. We're also funded by half of what is given to blessing boxes, with the other half going to DMF to support the whole mission of the church. One way we can secure the future of Disciples Women as a self-determining ministry is to be able to show that this is important to the women of the disciples of Christ. My dream is that we might establish an endowment fund for the sole purpose of supporting the ministry into the future. As our current budget stands, that would require about a $10 million endowment. While that seems like an enormous goal, I believe that there are women in the church who can contribute to making women's ministries secure into the future. It may not be one person, but there may be 10 women with $1 million, or there could be 20 women with $500,000 each. I've also seen what Disciples Women can do when they decide to support something important to them. We are currently in conversation with the Christian Church Foundation to see what our next steps might be to make this a reality. Perhaps you or someone you know might be excited about establishing a fund to support women's ministry into the future. We will continue to share this information with you. The other subject that I was asked to talk with you about is human trafficking. We've been working on this as our social action emphasis for several years, but there is still a lot to do. The executive committee decided to continue this focus since there is still so much work to be done. It becomes a real problem for immigrants and refugees. Our immigration system has been broken for years. Those who are forced to leave their homes because of war, poverty, or violence of many kinds find themselves extremely vulnerable to traffickers. Those who are stopped at the border or who are deported are met by all sorts of traffickers with stories that mislead them and put them in jeopardy. Sometimes they find themselves so desperate that they believe because they want to have hope in some way to survive. I was recently in Indonesia for a conference on human trafficking. There were 60 people from 11 countries. The horrors of trafficking in Southern Asia are nearly unbelievable. People are being trafficked so their organs can be harvested, and babies of pregnant women are taken and sold. Indonesia is a very poor country with huge numbers of people left with no work. Out of desperation, they are forced to become migrant workers in other countries. Unfortunately, as soon as they arrive in those countries, they have no rights and no protections. Sometimes they are promised $400 a month and receive only $50 a month, and they have no recourse. Women are vulnerable to rape and violence. Children are sometimes left behind with churches and other family members who are left to support and protect them. Sadly, many who left to make a living for their families return in coffins. While I was there, several bodies were returned to their families, and of course some of them had no families to receive them. A group from the conference went to meet them and pray with those gathered. For those who work in Indonesia, this is a common part of their ministry. This was not only heartbreaking, but so different from our experience of trafficking. Rarely do we know what happens to victims of trafficking from the U.S. They disappear off the street, and we are left to wonder what happened to them. We rejoice for those who survive and are found. For Indonesia, the migrant workers are the largest number of victims, and as usual, women are the most vulnerable. Of course, this leaves children vulnerable to all sorts of abuse and violence. We continue to focus on human trafficking as well as the additional vulnerability of refugees and immigrants. The work we do together is as important as it's ever been in protecting women and children, and of course, as men as well. Thank you for all you do. I hope your time together will be valuable. Blessings on the work ahead and blessings on your time of celebration.